Really thrilling to be here to collaborate with Allego and talk to John on this topic because it's one that's become so near and dear to our hearts over the last 12 to 16 months, really, as we've really experienced a change in the way we've delivered the majority of our sales training. I mean, we're a sales and sales management training company. We were doing over 80% of our business in the live classroom or some mix of blended and live. And as most of you have experienced, starting in March of last year, that was no longer an option for us, and we pivoted fully to virtual and then on-demand and collaborative. And in fact, we've seen outcomes improve, participant interaction improve, and satisfaction scores in many cases improve as a result of creating a more collaborative way of engaging over a period of time. And so I think it's an exciting development in the industry, and something that I don't think any of us could have pivoted maybe quite as quickly as we were forced to, but it's an interesting opportunity to be here, and really looking forward, John, to collaborating with you and hearing a little bit more about some of Allego's experiences and some of the samples and lessons you're bringing as well. So welcome, John, and again, thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Very excited to be here, and thanks to everybody for joining. Couldn't be more excited to dive into this topic. I think it's a good one. We've just learned so much over the past year plus in so many different categories, right, of work and life. But this, onboarding ramp up time, this is really important, and we get a lot of questions on it all the time. So excited to jump in.
Yeah, let's do it. And this is an interesting topic because we weren't having this conversation, this time last year, and so the idea of now, as people are adding to, they're replacing, they're looking at expanding through the rest of the year, this topic is really important, and to get it right, as we'll talk about, has a huge ROI. So, how do we do that cost effectively, and how do we do it with that challenge of virtual and not having necessarily all of the options that maybe we had a year or two ago? So in terms of where we're headed, we're going to talk about the challenges, some of the challenges that this unique environment brings, and how we can respond to that. And then talk about this idea of a collaborative environment and why that's so important, and how that actually helps us leverage that peer-to-peer and learning in the flow of work idea. So how do we get them up to speed, practicing and applying the skills just as soon as possible? And then we'll talk about how do we keep that alive through continuous learning and coaching, and why that's so critical to keep the learning happening, and not just have onboarding be an event where they're done and then we throw them out into the field and hope that they sink or swim, right? Hope that they swim, but that we're really looking at how do we support them going forward. So we have a big journey here. But John, any opening comments, I guess, on the agenda?
No, I mean, I think this is such an important topic to dive through, and I think we're going to talk about it in some new ways, Ray, right? That maybe folks don't associate with traditional onboarding and training. But I think we all need to be open-minded right now. That's one of my primary takeaways, is that we need to be open-minded. We need to be flexible in terms of thinking about how do we bring teams together when we're distributed or in hybrid situations, and how do we get our new hires up and running even faster than we have in the past. I think it's possible. We just have to reframe how we think about onboarding and training in general in our minds. And I think we can help people unlock this challenge. So yeah, let's go for it.
Well, and that's so important, John, that this is more than just delivering content. And I think often, that's what we think about is, well, how do we deliver the content in a creative or engaging way? How do we get them up to speed with the skills and the knowledge? But onboarding is so much more than that. And I even think back to early in my career, I transitioned out of the Navy. I started with Accenture. And even as an experienced hire, I got shipped back to St. Charles for 3 weeks for an immersive onboarding experience. And that was as much about the culture, the engagement, collaborating with your colleagues, learning about the organization, as it was, understanding the skills that they wanted us to learn as a consultant. And I think, as we'll talk about, how do we do that then in a virtual or a hybrid environment, and at least create some of that engagement?
Yeah.
So let's jump in. Specifically when we're talking about onboarding salespeople, I think it's so important to get this right, because it really is a return on investment discussion. It's the idea, and if we think about the rep as a revenue stream or as contributing to our revenue engine, and this is much more than, okay, we're just going to plug them in and let them go, but we really want to think about what is that sales rep going to contribute to the business. So what's the quota, what's the target we're looking for, and how quickly can we get them there, right? How soon can we ramp up? And when we look at ramp up time, if we're able to shorten that ramp up time, even by a few weeks, it pays huge dividends on getting that person, right, to both develop a pipeline and also start closing business sooner. And the sooner they do that, obviously, the sooner they're recovering the investment that we've made in there. So I think we really need to consider that and think about, well, what are we doing that's going to get them to that level, and how long is that going to take us?
Yeah.
John, we use this simple formula, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it as we're calculating that ramp up period, because that can vary for different organizations, and certainly there are different requirements that are involved. But thinking about, well, what's the average sales cycle? So, maybe it takes 3 months to close a deal, or maybe it takes 12 months to close a deal. But we need to look at that average sales cycle that it takes when somebody is ramped up, and then add at least 90 days on top of that for them to get onboarded, get trained, start trying it out, start building their pipeline. And so, we can use that as just a very rough formula to think about that ramp up period. But I'm curious what you've experienced with some of your clients in terms of, how quickly they can get them up to speed, and if we can shorten that, through collaborative learning or using some of the technology we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good, simple model, right? I think it can apply to a lot of folks, but it's not universal, and every company is different. Every company I've worked for has different expectations about how quickly it takes to get ramped, and certainly sales cycles can be all over the place, as you said. So I think you need to focus on the components that you can control in onboarding. And what we find is that onboarding is really most effective when it's not siloed, right? It's not, you're obviously getting flown in for a 3-day training session right now to the company HQ is not happening a lot, but it's even doing a live video session in a similar way, it's typically not enough, right? How many times have we seen the statistic that 80 to 90% of learning is lost within a couple of weeks after the initial training session, right? It just goes out of your brain. Humans don't really like learning in that really compressed, intense way. It needs to be reinforced. I'm not saying that live training isn't good. It's incredibly important, but how are you surrounding that training, right? Are you surrounding it with ongoing reinforcement over time? Are you surrounding it with peer-to-peer learning, so that you're learning not just from a manager, from a trainer, from a coach, but from the people who are in the field with you? At Allego, we know that sellers like to learn from other sellers. That's really important. They trust the people on their team who are, in the field with them, going through the same challenges, the same ups and downs. Being able to share that knowledge and learn from one another rather than just in a top-down format, that's really, really helpful. And we've seen our clients really succeed with that sort of model, where you're supplementing formal training with this more dispersed, in the flow of work, peer-to-peer collaborative learning. Makes everybody more effective, and it has actually shown to decrease ramp up time as well. So that's how we like to think about it in a nutshell.
Absolutely. No, I think thinking of it as an integrated process, and it's a stream, right? That you're trying to get them up to speed as much as possible to do the things that they need to start to build their pipeline or to move forward, versus saying, we're going to do this for 6 months and then let them loose or turn them over. And, Scott asked a question in the chat about milestones along the way. And I think that's such a great idea as a way of measuring. It's not just to say, well, when are they at quota? Because that can take months and months, and we certainly don't want to wait to know if there's a problem. But what are those milestones along the way, those guideposts to say, well, how long till their first meeting? How long till their first meeting solo? How long till their first demo or their first proposal? Yep. When do they put their first deal into the pipeline? How long does that take? So we can start to compare that with other new hires to see what those average milestones should be. Is somebody on track then to close their first deal to get to a run rate that's going to support their quota going forward? So now we're able to work back and say, okay, well, now we should be able to see what should happen after 30 days, after 60 days, after 90 days, and not wait till the end and find out that we haven't been successful.
Oh, 100%. I think in order to do onboarding well and understand how your team is performing, you need to have a very intimate understanding of your funnel, right? Pre-sale. What are all of the important milestones within it. And it's going to be different for every company, but when is a meeting scheduled? How long after that is a deal expected to close? When does a lead become a sales qualified lead or a sales accepted lead? Does it get to certain other stages? And every company has different ones, so I won't generalize too much. But you need to understand. You need to understand how your funnel flows, the math behind it, and what every rep needs to be producing throughout that funnel pre-sale in order to understand, are they on track or are they off track? Because in the vast majority of cases I've seen, especially in a complex B2B sale, like you said, Ray, you cannot wait until a deal is closed to say, oh, this rep is doing well or doing poorly. It'll be way too late by then.
No, and I think that was the other part of Scott's point, which is sometimes clients don't know what the sales cycle time is or what those milestones are. That's a great place to start, is defining some of those, or at least understanding what success looks like. But yeah, sometimes that's a challenge. We don't have the data that we would want. And Randy also mentions, it's dependent on the client's budget, and absolutely, it depends on the sales cycle, how long and what's the seasonality, how long is that going to take? And so I think those are all really important factors.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, and somebody asked about the recording, and absolutely, we'll send a follow-up with the recording as we go along. So let's keep it going here. From a training aspect, and I think these are pretty profound, simple questions, but profound ones, which is, what do we want the sales rep to know, right? So what knowledge do we need to transfer during that time period? Where's the information located that they can go find? So, we probably can't expect them to remember everything, but at least do they know where the references, the guides, the playbooks, et cetera, where is that going to be? How does the rep perform their job? So what processes do they need to complete? How do they go about that? And who should the rep contact to get things done? So where do they go for what? And so again, we probably can't answer all of their questions, but at least helping them understand where that information is or what resources they have. If we could start on that level, and we'll talk about how the training can support that, and also get them to start applying those skills. So, go do some activities, some missions, if you will, that are going to require them to go use that information or apply it.
Yeah, these are great points. And it's funny, I'm actually kind of drawn to bullet number 2. maybe that's a weird place to go, but where is the information located is a benign but very, very important question, right? For new hires and for everybody. Because if you don't have a system that easily surfaces the content that you need at any given point in time, your reps are going to spend so much time looking for things, right? Or, reaching out over Slack or email. Oh, where was this thing? Oh, I saw this, but I don't remember where it is. Can you point me to this? A lot of wasted time. There's a lot of friction there. So if you have a system and a process where all of your learning content is in one place, it's tagged, it's discoverable, easily searchable. Again, enabling your reps to take some ownership and agency over their learning process. That's really, really important. But obviously, all these points are critical to the training and onboarding process.
No, and it's great, to understand where to go. And then also, if we can foster this idea of peer-to-peer learning and collaboration, hey, if they can post a question somewhere, or if they have a mentor or somebody that's a safe place to go because they don't want to ask their manager again, but they can learn from each other, or maybe the question's been answered 5 times before. So let's point them to that information. So again, I think they can learn as much from each other as they're going to learn from a formal class or the guide.
Yeah, and I think it's such a key point. It is central to the philosophy that we have at Allego. But when you think about it from a manager's perspective, we're trying to disperse some of the responsibility of managers and trainers, right? If you're a coach or a trainer, there is so much on you individually to structure all of your courses, to grade all of the quizzes, make sure everybody's moving at the same or at the appropriate pace. Like, yes, that has to be done, but if you can start to distribute some of the workload in terms of this peer-to-peer knowledge and knowledge sharing and collaboration that you're talking about, Ray, and put some of that weight on the team, across the team, so that they're learning from each other, again, that makes everybody's lives easier and better. And I think you could argue that it makes training and learning and onboarding a more natural process as well, rather than something that is forced.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get some feedback from the audience here. So, the other part of that is when we think about actual training that needs to happen, right? We talked about the skills and knowledge. what does that mean? And it's typically some selling skills. Do they know how to sell? Do they have the proficiency they need? But they need to know the product and the industry as well. And oftentimes that's where the focus is, right? Is, hey, if you can understand the features and specs or the technical components, then go out and pitch it. But we need to really think about all of those things, which is, do they have the selling skills to be able to provide and understand the solution to be able to present to the customer? And do they know where all the tools are and the sales enablement technology and how to use everything that's there? So there's quite a lot, that's required in there. But what we want to do is get a little bit of input from the audience here. We're going to open up a poll, and just wanted to get an idea of how many sales professionals you expect to hire in 2021. And so I know we have a very diverse audience today, but we thought it would just be interesting, because what we're hearing is either we're replacing people, maybe we had some attrition or we downsized a little bit. We're ramping up. I know we have clients that are planning on growing quite significantly this year. So, I'd love to know, how big is the challenge for us? And just while we're waiting for that, John, I'm curious if you have any thoughts based on what your clients are seeing. But, in some cases, it's really difficult. We've got to scale a lot of people in a hurry and make sure we get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing across the board, varying plans for onboarding, but I do think, or hiring rather, but it is heating up. Like we said at the beginning, this isn't a conversation we were having last year at this time. But hiring is starting again. People are starting to think about, who do I need in my team? How do all the parts fit together, and how do I get them up and running quickly on the sales side? So scalability of training is always a question that we encounter at Allego. We try to help as much as we can, but moral of the story is we're seeing it pop up left and right, whereas we were not before. So we'll leave it at that and see how people responded here.
Yeah, we'll just share this. I think it's really interesting that over 50% of our audience today is hiring more than 10 people.
Yeah.
So 10 to 50 is, I think, the majority, 30%. And then 20% of our audience, so a fifth of our audience, is hiring more than 50 people this year. And so, that's a pretty big onboarding program when we think about ramping them up and getting it right. And I don't have to tell those people that. I'm sure they're living it every day. But even, the smaller team that's hiring 2 or 3 reps, but if you have a 5-person team, that's a pretty significant impact. And if we think about, if that's going to be a third of the revenue for the company because it's a small business, that's a pretty huge and strategic decision. You got to get the hiring right, and you got to get the onboarding right.
Yeah, I don't. Obviously, the more people you're hiring at once, the more scalable and coordinated your program has to be. But even if you're just hiring one person, that's super important in any position, but especially in a selling position. Think about the cost of losing that person, right? If they attrit or if they don't perform. There's so much hidden costs associated with hiring and turnover, and especially in a selling role, as you're dealing with all of that, that's time that is not being spent by a rep in the field closing deals, right? So there's a material monetary impact to training anybody in a subpar manner, regardless of whether it's 1 or 50 plus.
Absolutely. And John, we do that exercise in our recruiting and selecting stars workshop, where we talk about the cost of a bad hire. And it's always eye-opening when we start to break down, you got the recruiting costs, you've got the onboarding, you've got the training, you've got the manager's time, you've got to get them ramped up. And then there's that period where you're not serving that territory. So there's an opportunity cost associated with that. And then if we get it wrong, we got to start again from scratch and go through that all again. Typically, it comes up many times the annual salary of that individual. And I asked the sales managers, are you treating that like a $500,000 investment, or whatever that ends up being? That may be the most significant decision you make this year, but yet we kind of go through the motions, or sometimes we're so busy doing other things we don't have time to get it right. And in fact, we don't have time to get it wrong, either the hiring or the onboarding.
Yeah, it's tough, but it's critical. You're totally right.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the results here. And let's move on. We want to get more input, and I see a couple of chats coming in. We also want to get input from the group here, and that is, what are the challenges that you see with onboarding in this virtual environment? So if we think about things are different today, we've got this hybrid. What are some of the things you're running into getting people ramped up? And I know you have some research we're going to share on this, John, but I'm curious from the audience, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, what are some of the things you run into with onboarding in the virtual environment?
Yeah, virtual engagement. How do you engage your team? When you're dispersed, that's one we see all the time, right? Right. It's hard, and it's hard. I think we all experience Zoom fatigue or video conference fatigue. It can be hard to drive engagement when you're on back-to-back video calls. So we definitely see that one. Yep, Zoom fatigue just popped up from Scott.
Yep, absolutely. And the course completion, I think, is an interesting one. Is like if we can't get them to finish, or we don't know how, and I know some of the technology that we'll talk about of badges and getting points and being on a leaderboard, we can drive that engagement. And I think we're seeing some really good adoption with some of that technology. But yeah, sitting them down and saying, well, here's 10 hours of e-learning you got to sit through, not very engaging for the learner, for sure.
Killer. Yeah. Not enough time. That's a common one. Yeah, none of us have enough time in the day, it seems, to do our day-to-day jobs. Because I think it's important to remember a lot of the folks who are doing the onboarding, the managers who are onboarding, have day jobs, right? They're not necessarily a full-time trainer. So how do you find the time to connect with your team and train your team? I actually went through this recently. We hired a bunch of new people on my team, and it's really a full-time job to get everybody up and running and efficient, and then also focus on everything else you have to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great comments from the group here. Just getting feedback. You're missing that body language from going out and shadowing. A rep. Certainly, you can listen in on calls, but it's not quite the same. Really interesting to hear from the group here.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
All right, so let's talk about that. I mean, these are some of the things we've heard. Oftentimes if you're using your old process to try to onboard, but we have this new virtual world, it doesn't work so well. It's kind of like we saw a lot of that with in-person training where they said, well, we'll just turn that into Zoom sessions or online training. And you realize you really need to rethink the instructional design. You need to rethink the approach and the engagement. I think that's the same for onboarding, right? We've got outdated processes. We may need to look at, well, how do we do that? Just like this year, people are reimagining their sales kickoff meetings, and in some cases having great success, but you really have to rethink it from the start of how are we going to do this differently. And then we have lack of engagement, low motivation. A number of people pointed that out, that they're dedicating the time to training, or are we just throwing them out there, or are they actually completing it, as several mentioned. And then that idea of, how do you acclimate to the company culture, and how do we replicate that idea of being at the water cooler or going out for cocktails or whatever that team building event might have been in the past. What can we do to replicate that?
Yeah, that company culture point is so important. I think probably overlooked in a lot of cases, right? It's just about how do you gain the skills that you need to do your job. But so much of working at any company is how do you integrate into that company? How do you get a sense for what motivates that company and the people who work there? Again, how do you learn from each other? How do you replicate those brief but really critical informal interactions that happen all the time when you're in person or you're brought together? That's a massive part of onboarding. So I'm glad that we put that point here.
Yeah, and I think there are some things you can do with the technology to get people collaborating and sharing and that social side, but it needs to be fostered, and it doesn't happen naturally necessarily. It really needs almost a moderator, a champion, right? Somebody who's cultivating that or curating that information and making it available.
See, Martin says that Zoom drinks are not as much fun as in-person drinks, and I would have to agree with that. That's very true.
No, it's a great point. Even sending the cocktail pack, it's just not quite the same. But John, I know you did some research at Allego around this. Can you talk about that in terms of some of the challenges you've heard from your clients or seen as a result of this research?
Yeah, this was pretty eye-opening, and I definitely encourage everybody to head over to our website and check out the full report if you're so inclined. But you can see here, two very blunt statistics about onboarding in a virtual environment. On average, it takes 2 times longer for new hires to be productive during the pandemic compared to when they could train in person. And nearly 50% of sales leaders say that it is harder to get new hires up to speed and onboarded over the past year plus that we've been going through this pandemic and remote. It's not surprising, right? I think we could all have intuited this, but it's pretty stark to see it here in black and white, right? The fact that this is really presenting a challenge in a lot of industries. Folks were not prepared for this really sudden shift that we all went through. And we've all been learning together, kind of on the fly, about what works and what doesn't. I think we've all learned a lot over the past year, but the challenges haven't gone away. And I think so. I guess the moral of the story here for everybody here is that if you are feeling a ton of friction in your onboarding process in a virtual world, you are definitely not alone.
It actually is harder. And just like Zoom fatigue is real, and people are exhausted at the end of the day. And onboarding is more difficult when they're not there in person, and you can't sit them down in the room, or you can't have them follow along for a day in the field and see what that's like. So yeah, I think it's good to acknowledge that, and then think about, well, what can we do to get around that? So let's talk about the idea of a collaborative environment, and how do we promote that so that we can encourage that cross-pollination and the connection among the people going through. So we think about this idea of collaborative learning, and we talk about our CLX, right, collaborative learning experience, as really blended learning at its heart. So the idea of maybe there's micro learning or VILT sessions, right? We're delivering content in some way, but we're also having skill application through missions or field work, things that they have to do. Maybe they have to upload a video and comment on each other. So they're quickly applying those skills, and then they're discussing and collaborating. So love the opportunity for people to chime in on each other's assignments, to see what good looks like, to be able to provide that input and have a best hit or greatest hits, best action to follow, where somebody else has done it and they can see what that looks like. And then we talked about access to resources. So if we have that in the same place, where now they can go and get access to the job aids or the guides or the reference materials, it's going to be great for them not to have to go to 10 different systems or different places to capture that. And then ultimately there's some completion, and we talked about the badges or gamification, but at the end of the day, how do they know they've gotten through it? And what does completion or success look like? But love to get your take on this, John, in terms of how you see this with Allego and some of your clients in terms of their solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the major takeaway from this slide, Ray, is that there is not necessarily a one size fits all way to train and onboard, right? Companies have lots of different tools at their disposal, and they need to utilize them. It can't just be, you can't walk through your training course, take the quizzes, ace the quizzes, and off you go. Learning and onboarding needs to be fostered constantly, using lots of different forms of media, different formats, video, text, right? Email, in-person video, live video. All of these different factors need to come together in order to form a training model that works for the individual, not necessarily for an entire group at one point in time, right? So things like gamification are important to motivate people to go through their training. Easy access to tools and resources in the flow of work on an ongoing basis. That is hugely important, and something that we focus on all the time at Allego. We want sellers to be able to access information when they need it. And I think I have some slides later that go into this, but learning is most effective when you are in the process of doing your job, right? So if you are prepping for a deal that's going to happen in 2 hours, you're going to be extra motivated to find the learning content that helps you close that deal, or deliver that pitch. So you need a tool that can help surface the appropriate materials at that point in time when you need it, not 6 months ago when you went through the first training. That's really critical, and something that we push at Allego a lot. Certainly discussion and collaboration is huge. And again, I think I have a slide in a little bit that talks about the idea of asynchronous collaboration. Mm-hmm. That's a critical concept that we should talk about, because again, Zoom fatigue is real. Coordination of calendars is extremely challenging, not just with groups, but certainly with individuals. And again, individual feedback and learning is incredibly important to focus on here, because everybody learns differently and has different strengths and weaknesses. So having a way to communicate and collaborate in a non-live fashion to get around calendaring is really, really important. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I can give you a good visual example of that. So across the board, there's so many. It's just important to remember there are so many components to onboarding and training and continuous learning that you have the opportunity to blend together to find the right mix for your team. right? It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area and opportunistic areas of learning that you should be thinking about as you go.
No, absolutely. There were several comments about instructional design or looking at the design. I think we need to design our onboarding and the instruction to support what we're trying to accomplish. And, going back to, well, what does onboarded mean? What are those milestones? And how do we leverage some of the things you mentioned, John, where they're doing assignments that are related to their first meeting, their first deal, closing that first piece of business.
Yeah.
Applying it as soon as possible, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And doing things like, with Allego, we've seen a lot of our clients do practice pitches, right? So a rep can go in, they can, as they're getting onboarded, as they've gone through training, they can then record themselves using Allego, delivering that pitch just to their manager. They submit it to their manager as a practice session. The manager can then watch it. They can watch how the individual delivers the pitch and submit point in time feedback right within that video to provide this individualized learning experience, and in a way that just really helps reps get up and running and understand what they're doing well, where their weaknesses are. Again, I know I've said this multiple times now, but in a way that matches what their skill set is and what they need to do to improve. So just an example of how technology can foster what we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, let's look at some of those samples. And, we look at in terms of different ways, and certainly there are lots of different ways you could look at this grid, but the trade-offs of, we've got traditional kind of e-learning or micro-learning, we've got instructor-led and virtual instructor-led. Certainly there's some trade-offs there as well. And then what we're calling collaborative learning experience, but kind of that blended view with the online and collaborative nature. And so e-learning, scales and it's accessible, and we can gamify it, and there's some benefits, but obviously it starts to break down when we're talking about the collaboration part of it and the interaction as much. Where ILT, VLT, very strong on the facilitation, the engagement online, but it's hard to scale, more expensive, more challenging, as you said, with time zones, et cetera. And we think that blended approach really helps to satisfy all of those components, because you can pull that together in a way that really optimizes what you're looking for and the outcomes eventually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's take a look at, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about Allego in terms of how you're approaching this, especially around, you mentioned asynchronous tech and getting that collaboration when maybe they aren't there live, but we still want them interacting, right?
Yeah, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Live video conferencing is great and really important to have those live interactions, but like we said, not always easy to find the time, and sometimes there's something to be said for having the opportunity to digest content at your own speed and on your own schedule. So at Allego, we really push this idea of asynchronous communication and collaboration, specifically through video. And again, when I say asynchronous, I mean non-live, right? So email is a really basic example of asynchronous communication. You receive the email, you respond to it on your own time. We level that up with video interactions. But again, I give the example of a rep can record themselves sharing a practice pitch or sharing intelligence about what they're hearing and seeing in the field. They can share that with their managers or with their team. And then, Ray, if you click over one, I think a build will happen where you can see, that within our tool, you have the ability to respond in line to video submissions, either via text, or you can actually record yourself giving feedback on what the person has just said in their video, and all the comments pop up in these comment cards here. Just a really nice, straightforward way of sharing feedback and brainstorming and all of that without having to be in the same place at the same time. We've seen usage of this type of tool go way up over the past year, as you might expect, as teams have gone more distributed. And it's really effective and it's necessary. And again, this is a good way to connect both with your manager directly if you're a rep, or vice versa if you're a manager, but also with your teams, right? So you can share this type of content with whoever you want, whoever it's going to be useful for. So this is what we're talking about when Allego is talking about asynchronous technology and communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's exciting from a coaching standpoint, because now we have the ability to coach where we can't necessarily be there all the time or even be out in the field like maybe we used to be or we'd like to be, but we can't be everywhere at once. But now we can do some coaching, after the fact, but with the real facts and data.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's explore that idea of peer-to-peer learning and content in a different way. And there's certainly a lot of research around how valuable that is and how people like to learn in different ways. But blending in that idea of learning from each other is going to be top of the list regardless. And how can we foster that? So especially in a environment where we can make it easy for them to do. Love for you to share a little bit more about what that looks like in a new hire or onboarding situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I say here on this slide, new hires need constant exposure to their teams to be successful. Again, not just to their managers, but to their teams. So how do you facilitate that in the virtual world beyond your typical Zoom sessions? Again, we come back to this idea of asynchronous communication and collaboration, but it needs to be easy, right? So at Allego, we really focus on making both the creation of content as well as the receiving of content, the digestion of content, really simple and straightforward so that anybody can do it. Yeah, you'll see here that you can just hold up your phone, you open the Allego app, you can record yourself. Again, it can be an introduction of who you are, where you're coming from, what help you need as a new hire, and you can share that with your team so that they know, again, where you're coming from and where they might be able to help you. Crowdsourcing knowledge sharing, crowdsourcing training, if you will, and you can add slides to your video. You can do just a screen grab with voiceover, all sorts of different formats, and just with a click of a button. And I don't mean to go on here, touting how great Allego is, but I think the point is that any technology that can do this is really useful because it's a way of connecting teams to each other. And I think I've already said that probably 10 times how important that is. But I think ease of use here is the point that I'm trying to drive home.
Absolutely. And the fact that it's integrated is so important to the user, I think, to make that seamless and a good experience. And I will say we love the concept, and we've done it, manually, where people are recording videos and they're posting them to a Dropbox or a SharePoint, or they're sending them in to somebody who's then proctoring that information. But boy, that has some additional challenges, I will tell you. And getting it right in the format and training people on how to capture versus, as you said, just clicking a button and being able to do it right in the native app.
Yeah, you want it to become a part of your reps everyday process, right? To absorb and create this type of content. And there's a good point on the slide here that that leaders and trainers can view all of this content that comes into them, and they can share the best of the best with the group. So they're crowdsourcing knowledge. They can see, oh wow, this is a really fantastic example that came in from Joe of how to deliver this slide deck. I'm going to clip this and I'm going to share it with the rest of my team so they can all see how Joe did this. And they should try to replicate that A-player behavior, so to speak. So multiple functions for this type of technology.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And that's, from a training standpoint, and then also just from a resources perspective and being able to curate or provide good insights and information. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think this is really interesting where, it used to be maybe we'd go to the studio and we'd create these videos that were, very highly produced. But the goal now is, hey, what can we do quickly? I mean, we like the idea of these voice of the seller videos.
Yeah.
Just having somebody talk about, their current situation and how they accomplished or overcame a challenge, something like that. But how do you integrate that within Allego?
Yeah, at Allego, we really hammer home the point of we're going for YouTube, not Hollywood, right? So you don't need all the lights and the incredible audio quality. You just need to be able to create content that's going to be used and that's going to be useful. So here, we have examples of what this content can look like. We call it Agile Content in contrast to formal content. So bite-sized nuggets of information that reps can access whenever they need it. So things like best practices, podcasts, success stories, competitive intelligence, market insights, all of that goodness. And you can see as you build out the slides here, Ray, that it's super easy to do this. You can click a create button. You can say, okay, now I want to share a win report. I want a deal. I want to share with my team how I did it, what challenges I encountered, and how I was able to overcome them. Again, we get back to this idea of replicating success in the flow of work, so that this is not just knowledge that is going to be shared once and accessed once. It's going to be knowledge that is shared and accessed time and time again as specific selling situations come up. So if you do one more build, Ray, you'll see that, just with a couple clicks of a button, you can pull up a recording of yourself, you can upload a PDF or a slide deck and talk to a wide variety of situations. I think that's important with any technology you're considering, is how flexible is it? Not just how easy is it, but how flexible is it? What types of scenarios can it accommodate to help people learn and gain the information they need, again, to do their jobs well?
No, that's great. And then having that collection or that library, right, of new assets that have been user generated, but help with that peer-to-peer connection and peer-to-peer collaboration.
Yeah, and easily accessible too, right? Just understanding it. We'll go back to that point of content management and discoverability and usability. You have to know where to find this stuff and how to use it in order for it to be effective.
That's great. Well, let's keep moving. We'll hit our last bullet, and I want to make sure there's time for Q&A at the end as well. And if you do have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A. That way it won't get lost in the chat as we're scrolling through. But we'll take questions at the end and then certainly follow up if we run out of time. But, we want to think about then, how do we leverage this in an ongoing, so that continuous learning, and also the manager's role in coaching to support the success. So, we know from a training standpoint, the best training in the world isn't going to work if there isn't some follow through and reinforcement and coaching. So the idea of making the job aids and the tools available, making sure there is ongoing reinforcement envisioned in the program, and that we're engaging the managers so that they can pick it up and help support it. And do they even know what that looks like, right? And being able to support just in time or in the flow of work learning to reinforce those concepts. So there's nothing worse than, I think, somebody coming out being trained and ramped up and ready to go, and then find out that their manager doesn't do it that way, or doesn't like that the way that's being done, or doesn't support it. And then obviously that investment has been wasted at that point in terms of that initial training. So I think there's a lot to make sure that we're reinforcing those skills over time and providing access to the relevant content as we go forward. So, maybe you could touch on that, John, in terms of, how do you curate that content? How do you make it available? What kind of resources do you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes to the point I was just making about easy discoverability and content management, right? So you want organized libraries of content so that reps know where to go and how to find it and how to use it. So libraries of win reports, playbooks, right? So you can say, hey, I'm selling to the head of sales at a big financial services organization. So I can go into my platform and I can find financial services content, persona-based content. I can see everything that I need right there. So it's really important to think about how you're organizing content so that it is useful. But as you can see here in the screenshot, we really try to do that pretty intuitively in Allego. Here are all the tasks that are assigned to you. Here's recommended content based on who you are potentially, or what your peers are accessing. So we try to build in some artificial intelligence to help surface recommendations. That really helps. But we try to give you everything at your fingertips that you might need on a daily basis in order to perform your job at a higher level. So yes, you can see a channel for company collaboration, all your internal collaborations. We use this tool all the time at Allego. I think that's probably the best ad I can give you, right. Is that on a daily basis, I am in Allego learning from my peers, just sharing knowledge with each other about it, even on the marketing team. I'm a marketer, not a seller. We use it all the time to share what's working, what's not, give updates on major projects or shifts in positioning, things like that. Here's an example of playbooks, people sharing different sales playbooks, again, based on certain scenarios. You can build team workspaces that are specifically built for collaboration. So again, I do not intend for this to be an Allego sales pitch, but the concept is, whatever tool you're using, whether it's a specific solution or something you built on your own, make sure you've thought through how your reps are going to access it, how frictionless that experience it is, and how easy it is to share and collaborate with one another. Because those are the things that are going to actually have an impact over time.
No, that's such an important point that, yeah, it may not be able to have the perfect solution and they're rarely perfect, right? But to start with anyway, but the concept of what information do they need? How are they going to get it? Do they know who to go to for that information? You can solve that in a lot of different ways. And maybe it starts with a shared drive and a well-organized playbook, right? That at least spells that out for them. But I think the key point is we need to have those components and work that into the onboarding process. So
Yep.
then the next piece of that, which I'd just love to have a short discussion on here, is around the manager's role then in supporting that. So if we've got them trained, they get access to the information, they've gone through that. But I'd love to hear just from the participants in the chat, what is the manager's role in your organization with onboarding? So in other words, where do they get involved, or kind of how engaged or involved are they, and what point in the process do they actually either step in or take over? So love to hear from the audience here. John, what do you see? I mean, it's across the board, but curious what you see from some of your clients.
It really is across the board. We have some managers that are very involved right up front, want to have control over the entire experience, and that's fine, right? Having a very hands-on experience. And we see others that aren't that way, that actually go to the peer-to-peer knowledge sharing first, right? Like here's a big library of content that was generated by your peers, applicable to a lot of different selling situations. Go through it, absorb it, then go take your training courses, and then come back and we'll talk about it, right? And then we'll talk about what you learned. So it's a bit more of a hands-off approach, but so we see both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, certainly depending on the organization and the maturity and the bandwidth, but the idea, and at least from our perspective, the manager's role should really start, if not from day one, even before that, right? So, with that welcome, with that onboarding process, and I think a couple of people are responding in now, but integrated in, and we need to think about their role throughout. So, are they part of the training? Are they part of the skill development? They're reviewing maybe the videos or the assignments. I think oftentimes, unfortunately, it gets left to the end. And it's like, okay, now here's your rep, go forward. And the manager doesn't really know much about that. Or it's really been the trainer that's developed the relationship with that individual and has gotten them to that point. So, I think taking that up much earlier on, defining that process, and we'll talk a little bit about the coaching that can be involved there.
Yeah, I think coaching is going to be a big part of this conversation. Developing that individual connection between manager and rep is critical for any successful professional relationship.
Yeah, and that's what Tamara mentions, engaging the people leaders before the hire starts, as we were saying, let them know what's expected, the deadlines, how they're going to be involved. 50% of the sessions, Gustavo mentioned, that the managers are involved, and so that's fantastic. To get them involved as early as possible, and giving the people leaders assignments within the on-demand. So really, really important, that they're actually helping to lead or run that. So we believe that that's a huge uplift, right? That having the managers involved and coaching in general creates leverage within the organization. So it helps the salespeople learn how to solve their problems if we can work on with them. We know that as their skills improve, the results, the performance is going to improve. So we want the manager to not be the chief problem solver, the one that steps in to fix everything, but helps them help themselves. And that actually frees the manager up to think more strategically. But it starts with making sure they're onboarded, and that new hire needs to be the top priority to make sure they are given the benefit of the doubt. They do have everything that they need to ramp up successfully and get them on board, early in the process.
Yep.
So when we think about coaching, and I just want to get to your slide because I think this is really important.
Yeah.
We think about today, the opportunities to coach, I think, are actually more than they even were previously, in terms of the access to technology and virtual. We don't have to wait until we can ride along a whole day with the rep. In the case of a field rep, we can coach before the calls. We can join the virtual meeting with them, even just as an observer. We can listen to those call recordings after the fact, or look at the conversational intelligence. So looking at the transcript, and you're going to talk a little bit about the analysis, coaching after the fact, where we're kind of doing the Monday morning quarterback and reviewing what happened, and then doing, role plays, sales simulations, practice. So there's such a great opportunity, but I think we often think of coaching as, oh no, I have to wait until I'm out there in the field or I'm closing a deal with them. And so it gets deprioritized. We should be thinking about coaching, all the time and everything we can do to support them.
All the time. And ride-alongs do not happen as frequently anymore, right? It's harder to have that happen in the field anyway. So what are the ways around that? I totally agree. You got to, if you're a manager, you've got to get involved early and often, and understand how your rep is performing at any opportunity you can. So we talk a lot at Allego about call coaching and conversation intelligence. I think we have a stat. It's not in this slide, but something along the lines of 80% of sales calls go unwatched by managers. 80%. So only 20% get seen at any given time. So that's really unacceptable, as I think we would all agree. You need a lot more transparency as a coach into the performance of your team on a daily basis. So how do you do that? Call coaching and call recording is a really elegant, pretty streamlined and simple solution for it. Because if you're automatically recording all of your reps' calls, that gives you access to everything, right? So as a coach, you have all of your team's calls at your disposal. You can see here on the screen, Allego's call coaching and conversation intelligence provides transcripts, as many solutions do. So you can see what's being said in any given time. You can see how often your rep is talking, how much they're talking, for how many minutes in a row they're talking, right? Are they actually having a conversation, or are they just talking out at a prospect? As we all know, we don't want to do, but that happens far too often. So you can start to get a really nice at a glance insight into how your rep has performed in a given call. What's really exciting about the conversation intelligence space, and something we've started to roll out at Allego, is, Ray, if you go to the next slide, we apply artificial intelligence to call recording functionality. And you can apply this to practice sessions too. But all of a sudden, your AI can start listening to every single call, right? So you have 100% call coverage, and it can tell you a lot of different things about how your rep performed in a given call, whether it's live or in a practice session. It can tell you how quickly they spoke. Was it too fast? Was it too slow? Did they use a lot of filler words like huh, right? We want to stay away from those. You can program the AI to look out for certain phrases that are positive or negative, or terms that are positive or negative, and it can pinpoint when those terms are used. So you can get a really at a glance, pretty pinpoint idea of how a rep performed, without having to necessarily watch the entirety of a sales call, which we all know is very time consuming depending on what the call is. So to have this guide, and that's what it is, it's not a replacement for a coach, not that, it's a guide. It tells the coach where to look for either something that went very well during a call or something that could be improved upon. And then you can use that to deliver individualized coaching at a greater scale than you were able to before. So this is really, really important, because coaching on a daily basis is critical to rep performance and success. And yet it is so incredibly hard to do when you're not sitting there with them. It's hard when you are sitting there with them, but even when you're not, it's really, really tough. So take advantage of any tools you have at your disposal, whether it's AI powered or not, but any tools you have at your disposal to make sure that you're driving these individual connections and understanding how your reps are performing at any given time.
No, and this is such an exciting area for the future, because I think we're learning and starting to see industry insights come out, right? Like, guess what? The best reps actually do listen more than others, and they're listening more than half of the time, and letting the customer talk more. They're asking more questions, right? And so some of those things that maybe we assumed, but now we have data and analytics to start to look at that. There was a comment from Edwin in the chat about sometimes our clients don't want the calls recorded. And obviously we need to be sensitive to that, but I've seen the barrier go way down. Zoom will just say, hey, this call is being recorded, or we can, let them know up front. And I can't think of the last time somebody said, I don't want you to record this call, at least in the US. Now, that may differ, but I think if there's an opportunity or to try it out, it can be very valuable. I think, and just to wrap up this discussion about coaching, when we think about traditional coaching as, well, let's build a coaching plan and help this rep perform better. Now we have insights that can lend themselves to, we go through the skill map with the rep to say, let's define some coaching priorities. But we can see how they did asking questions to develop needs, or how they presented their solution. Is there intelligence that can inform that conversation? So it's not just our opinion or our judgment, but we actually have some data, and we can work with them then to improve a couple of these skills at a time that are really going to, create a better outcome for them, higher performance.
Yeah, love it.
So I know we're on the top of the hour. We've covered a lot, but John, this has been a really fantastic and interesting discussion for me. So I've enjoyed the collaboration. We talked about onboarding and some of the challenges, making it collaborative, leveraging that peer-to-peer and learning in the flow of work, and then getting the manager involved and helping to continue that or create that continuous and learning environment as we go forward. So I'd love to have you just share any final thoughts here, and then we'll wrap up with questions and let Alonso take us home.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Ray. This has been a lot of fun. No, I think we said it all during the presentation. Onboarding has changed, learning has changed dramatically over the past year. And again, I just come back to the point of, you need to be flexible. You need to open your mind a little bit in terms of what's possible and what's important when it comes to onboarding and training in a virtual world. It's not the same as it used to be. It's harder, but a lot of the technology out there and a lot of the practices, that don't require technology that Ray's been talking about, are available to you to make onboarding more impactful. And onboarding is just so important. We can't emphasize that enough. How you start your job often reflects how long you stay at a company, right? So this is a very important moment in time that we're talking about right now. So take it seriously. If you're a manager, get involved early. Use technology to help your team stay connected. Rely on your team to share information with each other and help support each other. And if you do all these things, you'll be in a pretty good spot.